My husband Edgar was coaching our 9-year-old Timothy to tell the divorce lawyer that I was sleeping with my personal trainer. What Edgar didn't know was that I'd already installed cameras throughout our house and caught him with his secretary Yvette in our marital bed 3 weeks earlier. When the lawyer asked Timothy to repeat his rehearsed lies about Mommy's affair, I placed a tablet on the conference table and pressed play. Edgar's face went white as his own voice filled the room. "Tell them you saw Mommy kissing the trainer. Buddy, tell them she doesn't love Daddy anymore." Then came the second video, Edgar and Yvette, crystal clear, in our bedroom. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The lawyer looked at Edgar and said, "Mr. Morrison, I think we need to discuss a very different settlement arrangement." The conference room smelled like expensive leather and broken promises. I sat across from Edgar Morrison, the man I'd called my husband for 12 years, watching him fidget with his Mont Blanc pen while our divorce attorneys shuffled through documents that would determine the fate of our $2.3 million estate. Our son Timothy sat beside Edgar, his small hands folded in his lap, rehearsing words that would destroy his mother's reputation and secure his father's financial future. What Edgar didn't realize was that this wasn't going to be the ambush he'd so carefully orchestrated. This was going to be his reckoning. For 3 months, Edgar had been laying the groundwork for this moment. He'd convinced our friends that I was acting strange, hinted to neighbors that our marriage was troubled, and most devastatingly, coached our innocent 9-year-old son to testify that he'd witnessed me having an affair with Gordon Hayes, my personal trainer at Elite Fitness. "Mommy has been spending a lot of time with Mr. Gordon," Timothy would say, his voice carefully coached, to sound confused and hurt. "She kisses him when she thinks I'm not looking. She tells him she loves him more than Daddy." Every word was a lie. Every syllable was Edgar's manipulation of our child's trust. But Timothy didn't know he was lying. In his 9-year-old mind, Daddy was helping him tell important grown-up stories to help the family. Edgar had turned our son into an unwitting weapon against his own mother. The truth was devastating in its simplicity. Edgar Morrison, successful real estate developer and pillar of our community, had been having an affair with his 26-year-old secretary, Yvette Rodriguez, for 8 months. While I attended Timothy's soccer games and managed our household finances, Edgar was taking extended business lunches and client dinners that ended in hotel rooms across the city. I discovered the affair the way most wives do, through the accumulation of small inconsistencies that eventually formed an undeniable pattern. Credit card charges for restaurants I'd never been to, phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, the smell of unfamiliar perfume that lingered in his car, new attention to his appearance that had nothing to do with impressing me. But Edgar was clever. He knew that in our state, infidelity could significantly impact divorce settlements, especially when substantial assets were involved. Our portfolio included 3 rental properties, a vacation home in Colorado, Edgar's development company worth $1.8 million, and investment accounts that had grown steadily throughout our marriage. If I could prove his affair, I'd be entitled to a much larger share of our marital assets, so Edgar decided to flip the script. If he could prove that I was the unfaithful spouse, he could keep the majority of our wealth while positioning himself as the wronged husband and devoted father. What I witnessed through hidden cameras in our home was child abuse disguised as father-son bonding. Edgar would take Timothy into his study after dinner, close the door, and spend hours coaching him on the story he needed to tell. "Remember, buddy, sometimes mommies and daddies have problems, and we need to help the judge understand what's really happening," Edgar would say, his voice gentle and manipulative. "You love Mommy, right? And you want to help her be honest about her feelings?" Timothy would nod, trusting his father completely. "So when the nice lawyer asks you about Mommy and Mr. Gordon, what are you going to say? That I saw them hugging and kissing in the garage?" "That's right. And what else?" That mommy said she loved him and wanted to be with him instead of you? Perfect. You're such a good boy, Timothy. This is going to help our whole family. Edgar had crafted a narrative so detailed and consistent that Timothy genuinely believed he'd witnessed these events. He'd created false memories in our child's mind, exploiting Timothy's love and trust to build a case that would destroy me financially and socially. But Edgar had underestimated me. As a former paralegal who'd worked in family law before Timothy was born, I understood exactly what he was attempting and how devastating it could be. I also understood how to gather evidence. The hidden cameras I'd installed weren't just in common areas. They were strategically placed to capture both Edgar's coaching sessions with Timothy and his intimate encounters with Yvette. Professional-grade equipment with crystal-clear audio and video, legally installed in my own home, completely admissible in court. For 6 weeks, I documented everything. Edgar's lies to Timothy, his phone conversations with Yvette planning their secret meetings, their physical encounters in our marital bedroom while Timothy was at school and I was supposedly at yoga class, his financial manipulation, moving money into accounts I didn't know existed, preparing to hide assets before filing for divorce. I also hired a private investigator who confirmed that Edgar and Yvette had been seen together at 5 different hotels, 3 restaurants, and a weekend cabin that Edgar had rented under a false name. Credit card records, hotel registrations, restaurant receipts, a paper trail that painted a clear picture of a systematic affair. Now, sitting in this conference room, watching Edgar prepare to destroy his own son's relationship with his mother, for the sake of money, I felt a cold clarity that surprised me with its intensity. This wasn't just about our marriage or our money. This was about protecting Timothy from a father who would sacrifice his child's emotional well-being and moral development for financial gain. Edgar thought he was about to win the greatest victory of his life. Instead, he was about to learn that truth is always more powerful than lies, and that underestimating a mother's protective instincts is the most dangerous mistake a man can make. The tablet sat on the table in front of me, loaded with hours of video evidence. Timothy looked at me with confusion, probably wondering why Mommy seemed so calm when Daddy had explained she was about to be in big trouble. I smiled at my son, the child I would protect from his father's poison, and prepared to teach them both a lesson about truth that they would never forget. 18 months ago, if someone had told me that Edgar Morrison would one day coach our son to lie about me in a divorce proceeding, I would have laughed in their face. Back then, Edgar was the husband who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning, who never missed one of Timothy's Little League games, who held my hand during romantic dinners at Stella's Bistro downtown. Our life in Maplewood Heights looked like something from a lifestyle magazine. The colonial house with its perfectly manicured lawn, the 3-car garage housing Edgar's BMW, my Honda Pilot, and the vintage Mustang he restored on weekends. Inside, our home was a testament to 12 years of careful curation, family photos lining the hallway, Timothy's artwork displayed on the refrigerator, Edgar's real estate awards mounted in his study. Every Friday evening, we had family pizza night. Timothy would choose the toppings while Edgar and I shared a bottle of wine and discussed our weeks. Edgar would tell stories about difficult clients and successful property deals, while I updated him on Timothy's school progress and my volunteer work with the local animal shelter. These weren't the conversations of a couple heading toward bitter divorce proceedings. These were the conversations of partners building a life together. Edgar played the role of devoted husband with Academy Award precision. He remembered our anniversary, planned surprise weekend getaways to the mountains, and bought thoughtful gifts that showed he was paying attention to my interests. When I mentioned wanting to get back in shape after years of focusing on family, he enthusiastically supported my decision to join Elite Fitness and hire Gordon Hayes as my personal trainer. "You deserve to feel strong and confident," Edgar had said, kissing my forehead as I headed out for my first training session. "I'm proud of you for prioritizing your health." At dinner parties, Edgar would wrap his arm around my waist and tell our friends how lucky he was to have married his best friend. Stella keeps our whole family running smoothly, he'd say, using the nickname he'd given me early in our relationship. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I don't know what Timothy and I would do without her. Our friends Chloe and Fred Martinez would exchange knowing glances, the kind that couples give each other when they witness what they believe is genuine marital happiness. "You two are relationship goals," Chloe would say, and I'd smile, believing it was true. Edgar and I weren't just husband and wife. We were business partners in every sense. When he started Morrison Development 12 years ago, I was his first employee, handling the books, managing client relationships, and learning the real estate business from the ground up. Even after Timothy was born and I transitioned to part-time work, I remained deeply involved in the company's growth. I was the one who suggested we diversify into rental properties when the market was right. I found our first investment property, a duplex in the University District that generated steady income from student renters. Over the years, we'd acquired 2 more rental properties and the Colorado vacation home that Edgar claimed was our retirement plan. Every major financial decision was made together. When Edgar wanted to expand the business, we discussed the risks and benefits over dinner. When I suggested we increase Timothy's college fund contributions, Edgar agreed immediately. "You're the smart one with money," he'd say. "I trust your judgment completely." This wasn't just flattery. I genuinely was good with finances. My paralegal background had taught me to read contracts carefully, and my natural caution had kept us from making risky investments that could have jeopardized our family's security. Edgar relied on my analysis when considering new business ventures, and I took pride in being his trusted advisor. Our son Timothy was the center of our universe, and Edgar seemed to be an exemplary father. He coached Timothy's soccer team for 3 seasons, spent Saturday mornings teaching him to throw a baseball, and patiently helped with homework every evening at our kitchen table. Edgar never raised his voice with Timothy, never showed the kind of impatience that stressed fathers sometimes exhibit. "Buddy system," Edgar would say, giving Timothy their special handshake before school each morning. "We look out for each other, right?" Timothy worshipped his father. When asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, Timothy would say, "A builder like Daddy, so I can make houses for families." He would follow Edgar around the house during weekend projects, holding tools and asking endless questions that Edgar answered with infinite patience. Edgar created special traditions with Timothy that didn't include me: father-son camping trips, Saturday morning breakfast at the diner, and evening guy talks in Edgar's study. At the time, I thought this was healthy bonding. I encouraged Edgar to have one-on-one time with Timothy, believing it would strengthen their relationship and give Timothy positive male role models. "You're such a good dad," I would tell Edgar as I watched him read bedtime stories to Timothy with different voices for each character. "Timothy is so lucky to have you." Edgar's reputation in our community was spotless. He served on the town planning committee, donated generously to local charities, and sponsored Timothy's Little League team. Other wives would compliment me on my husband's civic involvement, and I would beam with pride. "Edgar Morrison is one of the good ones," my friend Chloe would say. "You can tell he really cares about making this community better for families like yours." Edgar made a point of being visible at community events. He volunteered at the annual school fundraiser, participated in the charity golf tournament, and always bought tickets to support the high school theater productions. Other husbands would joke that Edgar was making them look bad with his level of involvement. Even the affairs of our neighbors seemed to strengthen Edgar's image as a faithful husband. When the Hendersons divorced after Mr. Henderson's gambling addiction came to light, Edgar would shake his head sadly. "I don't understand how men can risk their families like that," he'd say. "A wife and child should be a man's top priority." By 2023, our combined assets had grown to impressive levels. Morrison Development was valued at $1.8 million, generating consistent profits that Edgar attributed to our teamwork. "We built this together, Stella," he would say during our annual financial reviews. Everything we have is because we trust each other completely. Our rental properties provided additional income streams, and our investment portfolio had grown steadily despite market fluctuations. We owned our family home outright, had substantial savings accounts, and had fully funded Timothy's college education account. We're set for life, Edgar would say, reviewing our financial statements. Timothy will never want for anything, and we can retire comfortably whenever we choose. I felt secure, proud, and grateful for the life we'd built together. Edgar Morrison wasn't just my husband. He was my partner, my co-parent, and my best friend. The idea that he could be systematically planning to destroy me while building this beautiful life was so far from my reality that it would have seemed like fiction. This was the foundation that made Edgar's betrayal so devastating. He hadn't just lied to me, he'd built an entire false reality that made his eventual manipulation feel like the ground disappearing beneath my feet. What made Edgar's eventual betrayal so devastating wasn't just the 12 years we'd been married, it was how completely intertwined our lives had become. We weren't just spouses sharing a house. We were true partners who had built every aspect of our existence together, decision by careful decision. When Timothy started having nightmares about monsters in his closet at age 6, Edgar and I spent hours researching child psychology approaches. We created a monster spray bottle filled with lavender water and took turns sitting by Timothy's bed until he felt safe. When Timothy struggled with math in 2nd grade, we hired a tutor together and alternated helping with homework. These weren't just parenting moments. They were the building blocks of a family unit that felt unbreakable. Our financial partnership went far beyond basic bill paying. I wasn't just Edgar's wife who happened to be good with numbers. I was his trusted business advisor whose insights had directly contributed to our success. When Edgar was considering whether to bid on a major commercial development project in 2021, I spent weeks analyzing market trends, construction costs, and potential return on investment. The profit margins are solid, I told him after reviewing comparable projects. But the timeline is aggressive. If we take this on, we need to factor in potential delays and cost overruns. Edgar listened to every concern, asked detailed questions about my analysis, and ultimately decided to bid $50,000 higher than his initial estimate to account for my projected contingencies. We won the contract, completed the project on time and under budget, and netted $340,000 in profit. Edgar credited my analysis in his presentation to potential investors, calling me the brain behind Morrison Development's risk management. Edgar didn't just rely on my financial expertise. He included me in every major decision because he claimed to value my judgment. When his business partner wanted to expand into residential flipping, Edgar brought the proposal home for us to discuss over dinner. "What's your gut feeling?" he asked, spreading blueprints across our dining room table while Timothy colored nearby. "The numbers look good on paper, but I trust your instincts more than any spreadsheet." I studied the proposal for 3 days, visited comparable properties, and researched the specific neighborhood's appreciation trends. My recommendation was to pass on the opportunity because the area's school district was facing budget cuts that could negatively impact property values. "You're absolutely right," Edgar said after considering my research. "This is why I married the smartest woman in town." 6 months later, the first house they would have flipped lost $30,000 in value when the elementary school was forced to close due to district budget cuts. Edgar made sure to tell our friends how my analysis had saved Morrison Development from a significant loss. "Stella doesn't just balance our checkbook," he would say proudly. "She's the reason we can afford Timothy's college fund and our retirement plans." Our approach to raising Timothy was completely collaborative. We made decisions about his education, activities, and social development as a unified team. When Timothy expressed interest in learning piano, Edgar and I researched instructors together, visited 3 different music schools, and jointly decided on Mrs. Chen at Harmony Music Academy. Edgar would drive Timothy to lessons on Tuesdays while I handled pickup on Thursdays. We both attended Timothy's recitals, both celebrated his progress, and both enforced practice schedules when his enthusiasm waned. This wasn't a situation where one parent was the disciplinarian and the other was the fun parent. We presented a united front on everything. When Timothy asked difficult questions about topics like death, divorce, or why some kids' parents didn't live together, Edgar and I would discuss our responses privately first, ensuring we gave consistent, age-appropriate answers that aligned with our values. "We want Timothy to grow up feeling secure and confident," Edgar would say during our evening conversations after Timothy was asleep. "The most important thing we can give him is the knowledge that his parents are a team." Edgar was particularly adamant about protecting Timothy from adult stress. If we disagreed about something, and we rarely did, we made sure to hash it out privately rather than arguing in front of Timothy. Edgar would often praise me for my patience with Timothy's childhood phases and my ability to explain complex concepts in ways our son could understand. Our reputation as a couple extended far beyond our immediate family. Edgar and I were the couple other people looked to as an example of a successful marriage. We hosted dinner parties where Edgar would cook his famous barbecue while I prepared sides and desserts. Our friends would comment on how effortlessly we worked together, how we seemed to anticipate each other's needs. "You two have something special," our friend Fred would say, watching Edgar and me coordinate serving dinner to 12 guests without a single moment of confusion or conflict. Chloe and I have been married 15 years, and we still bump into each other in the kitchen. Edgar would always redirect credit to me in these moments. "Stella's the organized one," he'd say. "I just follow her lead and try not to mess up her system." We were the couple friends called when they needed relationship advice. When Chloe and Fred went through a rough patch over Fred's spending habits, they came to our house for guidance. Edgar and I spent hours listening to their concerns and sharing strategies that had worked for us. "The key is communication and respect," Edgar told them, his arm around my shoulders as we sat on our living room couch. "Stella and I tell each other everything. No secrets, no hidden resentments. That's why we work." Beyond the public displays of partnership, Edgar and I shared the kind of intimate trust that develops over years of consistent reliability. He was the person I called when I was running late for Timothy's pickup. I was the person he texted from work when he needed me to handle an unexpected client issue. Edgar knew my vulnerabilities, my tendency to worry excessively about Timothy's safety, my insecurity about not having completed my college degree, my fear that I wasn't contributing enough to our household despite my business involvement. Instead of exploiting these insecurities, Edgar consistently reassured me. "You're the strongest person I know," he would say when I expressed doubts about my capabilities. "Timothy is lucky to have you as his mother, and I'm lucky to have you as my partner." When I decided to return to the gym and hire a personal trainer, Edgar's support felt genuine and enthusiastic. "You deserve to feel confident and strong," he said. "Whatever makes you happy makes me happy." Our conversations about the future were detailed and collaborative. We planned Timothy's education path, discussing whether private school would be worth the expense and which colleges might best suit his interests and abilities. We talked about expanding Morrison development, potentially opening a second office in the next county. Edgar would often bring up retirement plans, describing the travel we'd do once Timothy was independent and the house we might buy in Colorado, near our vacation property. "We'll be those couples who take cooking classes in Italy and learn photography," he'd say. "We've earned the right to be selfish with our time after raising Timothy and building the business." These weren't casual daydreams. They were concrete plans backed by financial strategies and timeline discussions. Edgar seemed as invested in our shared future as I was, which made his secret planning for my destruction feel like the most profound betrayal imaginable. This foundation of trust, partnership, and mutual respect was what Edgar systematically dismantled in his quest for financial advantage. He didn't just cheat on our marriage. He weaponized 12 years of love and trust against me. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in March, disguised as a routine business call. I was folding Timothy's laundry in our bedroom when Edgar's phone rang on his nightstand. He was in the shower, and the caller ID showed Morrison Development Office, our business line that Yvette, his secretary, typically answered. Without thinking, I picked up. We'd always handled each other's business calls when necessary. It was one of the small intimacies of our partnership that I'd never questioned. "Hello, Morrison Development. This is Stella." The silence on the other end stretched too long. Then, a female voice younger than mine with a slight tremor of surprise. "Oh, I was looking for Edgar. He's in the shower. Can I take a message, or would you like him to call you back?" Another pause. This is Yvette. From the office. I'll call back later." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone, replaying the conversation, in my mind. Yvette had been Edgar's secretary for 8 months, hired after our previous assistant relocated to Florida. I'd met her twice. Once when Edgar introduced her at the office Christmas party, and again when she'd delivered contracts to our house that Edgar needed to sign urgently. What struck me as odd wasn't that she'd called Edgar's personal phone. Business and personal lines often blurred in a small company. What struck me was her reaction to hearing my voice. The surprise, the almost guilty stammering, the abrupt hang-up. As if she'd expected Edgar to answer and had been thrown off by the possibility of speaking to his wife. When Edgar emerged from the bathroom, towel wrapped around his waist, I mentioned the call casually. "Yvette called your cell. I told her. You'd call back." Edgar's reaction was barely perceptible. A momentary tightening around his eyes, a half-second pause before responding. "Okay, thanks. Probably just checking on the Riverside project timeline." He picked up his phone immediately and walked into his closet to get dressed, closing the door behind him. Edgar had never been modest about changing clothes in front of me. In 12 years of marriage, the closet door had always stayed open during our conversations. Through the thin door, I heard him make a call. His voice was lower than usual, the tone more intimate than professional. I couldn't make out specific words, but the cadence was wrong for a business conversation about project timelines. When he emerged, fully dressed, his expression was carefully neutral. "Just checking on some permits," he said, not meeting my eyes. "You know how bureaucratic these city offices can be." That night at dinner, Edgar seemed distracted. Timothy was excited about an upcoming field trip to the Science Museum, chattering about exhibits he wanted to see, but Edgar's responses were mechanical, his attention clearly elsewhere. When Timothy asked if Daddy would be a chaperone, Edgar said he couldn't because of important meetings that week. This was unusual. Edgar had never missed an opportunity to volunteer for Timothy's school activities. He'd been a chaperone on every field trip since kindergarten, often rearranging his work schedule to accommodate school events. 3 days later, I discovered Edgar had changed the password on his phone. I found out accidentally when Timothy knocked over a glass of juice at breakfast, and the sticky liquid splashed onto Edgar's phone on the kitchen counter. "I'll clean it off," I said, grabbing paper towels and picking up the device to wipe it down. The screen lit up, prompting for a passcode. For 3 years, Edgar's passcode had been Timothy's birthday. 814. Simple, meaningful, something we both knew. The code didn't work. "Hey, what's your new passcode?" I called to Edgar, who was helping Timothy change his juice-stained shirt upstairs. "What?" His voice carried down, sharp with an edge I'd rarely heard. "Your phone got juice on it. I'm trying to make sure it's working properly." Edgar appeared at the top of the stairs, taking the steps 2 at a time with unusual urgency. "I'll handle it," he said, taking the phone from my hands more abruptly than necessary. "I changed it last week for security reasons. You know how hackers target business phones." This explanation made logical sense. Edgar's phone contained client information, contract details, and financial data that could be valuable to competitors. But the way he'd rushed downstairs, the way he'd taken the phone from my hands as if I'd been caught going through his personal belongings, felt completely wrong. "What's the new code?" I asked. "In case of emergencies?" Edgar's pause was barely noticeable, but I caught it. "I'll write it down for you," he said, then never did. Edgar's work schedule, which had been predictably consistent for years, began shifting without clear explanation. Instead of arriving home by 6:30 p.m. for family dinner, he started calling around 5 p.m. with updates about client meetings running late or permit issues that need immediate attention. "Don't wait dinner for me," became his regular refrain. "I'll grab something and be home around 9. When he did arrive home, usually closer to 10 p.m., Edgar seemed simultaneously wired and exhausted. He'd pour himself a scotch, unusual for someone who rarely drank on weeknights, and sit in his study reviewing paperwork that he claimed couldn't wait until morning. Timothy began asking why Daddy was always working late. "Is Daddy's job getting harder?" he asked one evening as I tucked him into bed alone for the third time that week. "Daddy's just really busy with important projects," I explained, echoing Edgar's explanations. "But he loves spending time with you, and weekends are still our family time." Except weekends were changing too. Edgar started scheduling Saturday morning site visits that required him to leave the house by 8 a.m. and return around noon. These visits to various properties had always been part of his routine, but they'd typically been midweek appointments that didn't interfere with family time. The smell hit me one evening when Edgar leaned down to kiss Timothy goodnight. A sweet, floral scent that definitely wasn't my perfume and wasn't anything Edgar normally wore. When I mentioned it, he explained that he'd been showing properties to a client who wore way too much perfume, and the scent had transferred to his clothes during their handshake. "Some people have no sense of restraint with fragrance," he said with a laugh that sounded forced. "I'll need to shower before bed to get rid of it." 2 weeks later, cleaning out Edgar's car while he was at Home Depot with Timothy, I found a lipstick tube wedged between the passenger seat and center console. The shade was a deep red that I'd never worn. I preferred subtle pinks and neutral tones. The brand was expensive, more costly than anything I typically bought for myself. When I asked Edgar about it that evening, he looked genuinely puzzled. Maybe it fell out of Chloe's purse when we gave her and Fred a ride to the Martinez anniversary party last month. This explanation seemed plausible. Chloe did wear bolder makeup than I did, and we had carpooled to their friend's anniversary celebration. But something about Edgar's expression, the relief when he landed on a logical explanation, felt practiced, as if he'd been preparing responses for questions like this. Most troubling was the emotional distance that seemed to be growing between us. Edgar still said "I love you" before leaving for work and before bed, but the words felt automatic, stripped of the warmth and spontaneity that had characterized our relationship. Our evening conversations, which had once covered everything, from Timothy's development to business challenges to our future plans, became superficial updates about schedules and logistics. When I tried to engage Edgar in deeper discussions, asking about his stress levels, offering to help with whatever was making work so demanding, he deflected with vague reassurances. "Everything's fine, Stella. Just the usual business pressures. Nothing you need to worry about." But I was worrying. The man who had shared every concern, every triumph, every decision for 12 years was suddenly handling his challenges alone. The partner who had valued my insights and relied on my support was now shutting me out of problems that were clearly affecting our family life. These changes were subtle enough that I could rationalize each one individually. Business stress explained. The long hours. Security concerns justified the password change. Client interactions accounted for unfamiliar scents. But together, they formed a pattern that made me increasingly uneasy. Something was wrong in my perfect marriage, and Edgar Morrison, the man I trusted more than anyone in the world, was lying to me about what it was. My first concrete evidence came through our joint credit card statement in April. As the family financial manager, I reviewed all our accounts monthly, reconciling expenses and categorizing purchases for tax purposes. This routine had never revealed anything suspicious. Edgar's spending patterns were consistent and predictable, but April's statement contained charges that made no sense. 2 dinners at Romano's Italian Bistro, a restaurant across town that Edgar had never mentioned visiting. The amounts were significant, $127 and $143, suggesting elaborate meals for 2 people, not quick business lunches. The timing was also suspicious. Both charges occurred on evenings when Edgar had claimed to be working late on permit issues. More concerning was a charge for $89 at Victoria's Secret. Edgar had never bought me lingerie in 12 years of marriage. When I asked about it, his explanation came too quickly, too smoothly. Client appreciation gift for Mrs. Henderson. She helped expedite the zoning approval for the Maple Street project. Mrs. Henderson was 67 years old and had been helping Edgar navigate city bureaucracy for 5 years. The idea of him buying her intimate apparel was absurd, but Edgar delivered the lie with such confidence that I almost questioned my own judgment. The hotel charge was what made my hands shake. The Fairfield Inn downtown for one night in mid-April. Edgar had been home that entire week, sleeping in our bed every night. When I mentioned the charge, Edgar's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, calculation, then forced confidence. Conference room rental for the Johnson contract negotiation. Their lawyer insisted on neutral territory, and the hotel meeting rooms were the only space available on short notice. Edgar's phone conversations became increasingly secretive. He would step outside to take calls, claiming the reception was better in the backyard. When his phone rang during family time, he would glance at the caller ID and either ignore it completely or excuse himself to handle this business emergency. One Saturday morning, while Edgar was supposedly checking on the Riverside project, I heard his phone buzzing in his study where he'd forgotten it. The display showed 7 missed calls from YR and 3 text messages. When Edgar returned an hour later and discovered his phone, his panic was barely concealed. "Important client," he muttered, scrolling through the messages with his back to me. "Crisis at the downtown property." But if it was truly a client emergency, why hadn't he answered his office phone? I'd been home all morning, and the business line hadn't rung once. The most damning evidence came accidentally. Timothy had been playing with Edgar's phone while Edgar showered, launching the camera app and taking random photos the way children do. Later that evening, when Edgar was showing Timothy how to delete the silly pictures he'd taken, I glimpsed something that made my stomach drop. Mixed in with Timothy's blurry photos of the ceiling and his own feet was a photo that Edgar clearly hadn't meant to take, a mirror selfie showing Edgar with his arm around a young woman with dark hair. Her face was partially obscured, but her body language was intimate, comfortable. This wasn't a professional photograph with a client. Edgar deleted the photo quickly, but not before I'd seen it. When I mentioned it, his denial was immediate and absolute. "Must have been from the office Christmas party. You know how these phones accidentally take pictures. Except our office Christmas party had been 4 months ago, and Edgar's clothing in the photo was a blue shirt I'd bought him for his birthday in March." My suspicions about Yvette crystallized during an unexpected visit to Edgar's office in late April. I'd been running errands nearby and decided to surprise him with lunch from his favorite deli. The office was unusually quiet when I arrived. Edgar was supposedly at a client meeting, and Yvette was the only person present. Her reaction to seeing me was telling. Genuine surprise mixed with what looked like guilt, followed by an overly bright smile that seemed forced. "Oh, Mrs. Morrison, Edgar isn't here right now." "I know," I said, holding up the deli bag. "I thought I'd leave lunch for him. He mentioned working through lunch again today." Yvette's expression flickered. Working through lunch? He said he was taking the afternoon off for family time. The lie hung in the air between us. Edgar had told me he was meeting the Henderson development team. He'd told Yvette he was spending time with family. He'd lied to both of us, which meant he was somewhere else entirely, with someone else. Edgar's behavior with technology became increasingly paranoid. His laptop, which had always sat open on his home office desk, now required a password and was closed whenever he left the room. His phone was constantly face down and never left unattended. But Edgar had forgotten about our shared cloud storage account. Photos and documents automatically synced across our devices, a convenient feature for sharing family pictures and important documents. In early May, while looking for photos of Timothy's recent soccer game to send to my mother, I found images that didn't belong to our family collection. Restaurant receipts that Edgar had photographed, presumably for business expense records, but from establishments he'd never mentioned visiting. Photos of wine bottles and elaborate desserts that suggested romantic dining rather than business meetings. Most damning was a photo of car keys next to what appeared to be a hotel room keycard. The metadata on these photos revealed they'd been taken on dates when Edgar claimed to be working late or attending business meetings. The timestamps showed romantic dinners occurring during hours when I'd been home alone with Timothy, believing Edgar was handling work crises. The evidence that forced me to confront reality came through Timothy himself. Our 9-year-old had developed a habit of repeating interesting things he'd overheard, the way children do when they're processing adult conversations that don't quite make sense to them. "Daddy said something funny on the phone yesterday," Timothy mentioned casually during breakfast in early May. "He said, 'I love you too.' But you weren't on the phone, Mommy." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "When Daddy was talking in his study. He said, 'I love you too,' like he says to you, but you were folding laundry upstairs." Timothy returned to his cereal, unaware that he'd just confirmed my worst fears. Edgar was telling someone else he loved them. The phone conversations, the secret meetings, the lies about his schedule, they all led to the same devastating conclusion. Edgar Morrison, my husband of 12 years, my business partner, my co-parent, the man I trusted with every aspect of my life, was having an affair. But what I didn't yet realize was that infidelity was just the beginning. Edgar wasn't just cheating on our marriage. He was planning to destroy me completely, using our own son as his weapon. The beautiful lie of our perfect life was crumbling, but the real nightmare was still to come. The discovery that shattered my world came on a Wednesday afternoon in May, when I returned home early from the animal shelter. Timothy was at a play date with his friend Marcus, and Edgar was supposedly meeting with contractors at the Riverside project. The house felt unusually quiet as I walked through the front door, my keys jingling softly in the entryway. What I heard coming from our bedroom upstairs made my blood turn to ice. Edgar's voice, low and intimate in a way I recognized from our own private moments. "God, I've missed you. Stella's volunteering until 5, and Timothy won't be back until 6. We have time." A female voice responded, younger and breathier than mine. "I hate sneaking around like this. When are you going?" "To tell her about us?" "Soon," Edgar replied, and I could hear the rustle of clothing, the creak of our mattress, our marriage bed where we'd conceived Timothy, where we'd shared 12 years of intimacy and trust. After the divorce is finalized and I get the assets secured, then we can be together properly. My legs nearly gave out. I gripped the banister with white knuckles, forcing myself to remain silent while my entire world exploded around me. Edgar wasn't just having an affair. He was planning our divorce and discussing asset division with his mistress in the bed we shared. The woman's voice continued. "But what if she fights you for the business? For the properties?" "She's smart, Edgar. She handles all your finances." Edgar's laugh was cold and calculating, nothing like the warm sound I'd fallen in love with. That's exactly why this has to be handled carefully. Stella knows where every penny is, every contract, every investment. If I just file for divorce, she'll get half of everything, maybe more. But if I can prove she's been unfaithful, if I can document that she's an unfit mother who's been neglecting Timothy. The coaching sessions with Timothy are working? The woman asked. My heart stopped. Timothy. They were discussing Timothy. Like a charm, Edgar said with pride that made me nauseous. The kid believes every word I tell him. By the time we get to court, he'll testify that Mommy has been leaving him alone, neglecting him, and carrying on with her personal trainer. No judge will award custody or significant assets to an adulterous, neglectful mother. I forced myself to climb the stairs silently, each step feeling like I was walking toward my own execution. Through our partially open bedroom door, I could see Edgar with a young brunette woman who I now recognized as Yvette, his secretary. She was wearing one of my silk robes, the burgundy one Edgar had given me for our anniversary last year. You're sure Timothy will stick to the story? Yvette asked, running her fingers through Edgar's hair with the casual intimacy of established lovers. He's 9 years old and worships his daddy, Edgar replied with disgusting confidence. I've been very careful about how I've presented everything. I never tell him to lie. I just create scenarios in his mind and let him fill in the details. Remember when Mommy was gone for so long that evening? How scared you were. Pretty soon, he genuinely believes Mommy abandoned him. The manipulation was so sophisticated, so psychologically damaging, that I felt physically sick. Edgar wasn't just lying to our son. He was systematically rewriting Timothy's memories, creating false traumas that would damage our child's relationship with me permanently. And the personal trainer angle? Yvette pressed. Brilliant if I do say so myself, Edgar said with satisfaction. Stella hired Gordon Hayes completely innocently, but I've been planting seeds with Timothy about how much time Mommy spends with her special friend. I even drove past the gym a few times with Timothy, pointing out Mommy's car and suggesting she seemed happier there than at home. Yvette laughed, a sound that cut through me like glass. You're devious. I love it. The best part is that Stella has no idea what's coming, Edgar continued. She trusts me completely. By the time I file the papers and present Timothy's testimony, she'll be so shocked and devastated that she won't be able to mount an effective defense. I'll walk away with the business, the properties, and primary custody. She'll be lucky to get supervised visitation. As I listened in horror, Edgar outlined the full scope of his planning. He'd been systematically moving assets for months, creating hidden accounts that I didn't know existed. The offshore investments he'd claimed were, for tax purposes, were actually part of his exit strategy. The beauty is that Stella set up most of these financial structures herself, Edgar explained to Yvette. She's so good with money that she created the perfect system for me to hide assets within. Her own expertise is going to be her downfall. Edgar described how he'd been using my access codes and financial knowledge to move money into accounts under shell companies. My own skills as a paralegal and financial manager had provided him with the tools to steal from me systematically. What? About the house? Yvette asked. Stella will have to sell it to pay legal fees, Edgar said with cruel satisfaction. I've already spoken to 3 different attorneys about how to drag out the proceedings, make it as expensive as possible for her. By the time everything is settled, she'll be financially ruined and emotionally destroyed. The most devastating revelation came when they discussed Timothy's psychological state. Edgar described how he'd been gradually undermining Timothy's trust in me through subtle manipulation techniques that amounted to psychological abuse. The kid is already showing signs of confusion about his relationship with Stella, Edgar reported, like he was discussing a successful business transaction. He started asking me why Mommy doesn't love Daddy anymore, why she spends so much time away from home. I never directly answer. I just look sad and say that sometimes adults have problems that children don't understand. Yvette asked how Timothy was handling the stress, And Edgar's response revealed the depth of his selfishness. He's been having some nightmares and seems more clingy than usual, but that actually helps our case. A child showing signs of emotional distress supports the narrative that his mother is causing instability in the home. Edgar was willing to traumatize our 9-year-old son, his own child, to gain financial advantage in divorce proceedings. The man I'd trusted to co-parent Timothy was systematically damaging our son's emotional well-being for money. As I stood frozen in the hallway, Edgar revealed that his timeline was accelerating. "I'm filing next week," he told Yvette. "Timothy's coaching is complete, the financial transfers are in place, and I've documented enough of Stella's suspicious behavior to build a compelling case." "Next week?" Yvette sounded surprised. "So, soon?" "The longer I wait, the more chance there is that Stella will discover something," Edgar explained. "She's already asking questions about my schedule, about some of the credit card charges. I need to move before she gets suspicious enough to start investigating." Edgar was right. I had been getting suspicious, but I was weeks too late. While I'd been noticing small inconsistencies and trying to rationalize them away, Edgar had been implementing a comprehensive plan to destroy my life, steal my assets, and turn my own child against me. The man sleeping beside me for months, the father coaching Timothy with homework every evening, the business partner I trusted with every financial decision, had been methodically planning my complete destruction while looking me in the eye and saying, "I love you." As I backed away, from the bedroom door on silent feet, my mind was already shifting from heartbroken wife to survival mode. Edgar thought he was smart, that his plan was foolproof. But he'd made one critical error. He'd revealed his entire strategy while I was listening. Now I had exactly 1 week to save my life, my son, and everything I'd worked to build. I left the house as silently as I'd entered, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel. Edgar and Yvette were so consumed with their celebration of my impending destruction that they never heard my car start or noticed me backing out of our driveway. The 20-minute drive to pick up Timothy from his playdate felt like an eternity, my mind racing between devastation and cold calculation. By the time I reached the Henderson house, where Timothy was playing with their son Marcus, I'd made a crucial decision. Edgar would never know I'd discovered his plan. If he realized I was aware of his scheme, he might accelerate his timeline or change tactics in ways I couldn't anticipate. My only advantage was that he believed he was still operating in secret. "Mommy!" Timothy ran to me with his usual enthusiasm, his innocent face lighting up with genuine joy at seeing me. Looking at my son now, knowing how Edgar had been poisoning his mind against me, I felt a surge of protective fury that was almost overwhelming. "Did you have fun with Marcus?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain steady and cheerful. "We built a huge fort in his basement. Can Marcus come over this weekend? Please?" I nodded, ruffling his hair and fighting the urge to grab him and run as far from Edgar as possible. But running wouldn't solve anything. It would only confirm Edgar's narrative that I was unstable and unfit. Instead, I needed to be smarter than he was, more strategic, more thorough. "Let's go home and start dinner," I said, helping Timothy gather his backpack and soccer ball. When we arrived home, Edgar's BMW was in the driveway, but Yvette's car was gone. He met us at the door with his usual smile, the same warm expression he'd worn for 12 years, now revealed as the mask of a calculating sociopath. "How was your afternoon, sweetheart?" he asked, kissing my cheek with lips that had been on another woman an hour earlier. "Productive," I replied, and it wasn't a lie. "The shelter is organizing a fundraising gala next month. I volunteered to help with the planning committee. This was perfect. It gave me a reason to spend additional time away from home without arousing suspicion." Edgar actually looked pleased, probably calculating how my increased volunteer commitments could be twisted into evidence of neglecting Timothy. During dinner, I watched Edgar interact with Timothy with new eyes. Every casual question, "How was school today, buddy?" Did you have fun at Marcus's house? Felt like intelligence gathering. When Timothy mentioned that Marcus's mom had made them grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch, Edgar's response was subtly loaded. That's nice that other mommies take time to cook special lunches for their kids. The implication was clear to an adult but would be absorbed unconsciously by Timothy. Other mothers care more about feeding children than his own mother does. After Timothy went to bed, I retreated to my home office under the pretense of working on shelter fundraising materials. Edgar was in his study, probably coordinating with Yvette or his attorneys. The walls between our offices were thin, and I could hear him on the phone, his voice too low to make out specific words but carrying the intimate tone I now recognized. My paralegal training had taught me that successful cases were built on documentation, and I had 1 week to build an ironclad case against Edgar's manipulation. I started with what I could access immediately: our shared financial accounts, cloud storage, and business records. The offshore accounts Edgar had mentioned were harder to find than I'd expected, but my familiarity with our financial systems helped me trace unusual transfers. Small amounts had been moved regularly over the past 6 months, $5,000 here, $7,500 there, always below the threshold that would trigger automatic reporting requirements. Edgar had been stealing from our marriage systematically, using his knowledge of my own financial management systems against me. I found evidence of the shell companies he'd mentioned, registered with variations of our business name that would be easy to overlook in routine financial reviews. Morrison Development Holdings, Morrison Property Management LLC, Morrison Asset Services. Each company had received transfers from our legitimate business accounts, effectively allowing Edgar to steal marital assets and hide them in plain sight. Edgar's phone was impossible to access directly, but our shared family plan gave me administrative access to call logs and text message metadata through our carrier's website. While I couldn't read the content of his messages, I could see that he'd been communicating with Yvette's number dozens of times per day for months, calls and texts that occurred during business hours when they were supposedly working together, and during evening hours when Edgar claimed to be handling work emergencies. The frequency and timing of their communications painted a clear picture of an intimate relationship that extended far beyond professional interaction. On evenings when Edgar had claimed to be working late, the call log showed hour-long conversations with Yvette's number, often ending just minutes before he arrived home. More damaging were the weekend communications. Edgar and Yvette had been in constant contact during family time. Quick text exchanges during Timothy's soccer games, phone calls during our family outings that Edgar had excused as urgent business matters. My paralegal background became invaluable as I researched divorce law in our state, focusing specifically on cases involving parental alienation and hidden assets. What I discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. Courts took child manipulation very seriously, but proving it required substantial evidence. Edgar's coaching of Timothy constituted a form of psychological abuse called parental alienation syndrome. If I could document his manipulation techniques, his lies to Timothy, and the resulting emotional damage to our son, I could not only protect my custody rights, but potentially secure supervised visitation requirements for Edgar. However, the legal system moved slowly, and Edgar was planning to file within days. I needed evidence that was immediate, compelling, and undeniable. Proof that would stop his plan in its tracks rather than requiring months of litigation to resolve. The financial fraud was easier to prove, but required careful documentation. Moving marital assets to shell companies during divorce proceedings was illegal, but I needed to establish the timeline clearly and demonstrate that Edgar's actions were intentional and systematic, rather than legitimate business transactions. As I sat in my office, surrounded by financial printouts and legal research, I realized that catching Edgar in the act of his deceptions would be more powerful than any amount of circumstantial evidence. I needed video and audio recordings of Edgar coaching Timothy, of his intimate moments with Yvette, and of his discussions about hiding assets. Installing surveillance equipment in my own home was legal, and given Edgar's apparent comfort level. With bringing Yvette to our house, I was likely to capture damning evidence quickly. The risk was enormous. If Edgar discovered the cameras before I had sufficient evidence, he could accelerate his timeline or claim I was violating his privacy. But the alternative was allowing Edgar to proceed with his plan, losing my son to psychological manipulation and facing financial ruin while Timothy grew up believing his mother had abandoned him for another man. I had 5 days before Edgar planned to file for divorce. 5 days to gather evidence that would expose his lies, protect Timothy from further manipulation, and secure the assets we'd built together. Edgar thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. He was about to discover that I'd been trained to dismantle lies for a living, and I was very good at my job. Thursday morning, while Edgar was at what he claimed was a breakfast meeting with investors and Timothy was at school, I drove to 3 different electronics stores to avoid leaving a digital trail. The surveillance equipment I purchased was professional grade but small enough to remain undetected. Tiny cameras with audio recording capabilities that could be concealed in everyday objects. Installing them required careful planning. I placed one inside a decorative picture frame in Edgar's study, angled to capture his desk where he conducted his private phone calls. Another went inside a small potted plant in our bedroom, positioned to record the entire room, including the bed where Edgar had betrayed our marriage. The third camera was the most crucial, hidden inside Timothy's bookshelf, where it could capture Edgar's coaching sessions. Each camera was connected to a cloud storage system that Edgar didn't know existed, using an account I'd created with my maiden name and a credit card he'd never seen. The footage would be automatically backed up to multiple servers, ensuring Edgar couldn't destroy the evidence even if he discovered the cameras. By noon, my house had become a recording studio that would capture every lie Edgar told, every manipulation he attempted, and every moment of his affair with Yvette. While reviewing Edgar's recent credit card statements more carefully, I discovered charges that revealed the scope of his legal preparation. 3 different law firms had been paid consultation fees over the past 2 months, amounts that suggested Edgar had been shopping for attorneys who would support his aggressive strategy. One name appeared multiple times: Davidson and Associates, a firm known for representing wealthy men in contentious divorces. The charges totaled over $8,000, indicating Edgar had moved far beyond initial consultations into active case preparation. When I researched the firm online, their website prominently featured testimonials from clients who had successfully protected their assets from unreasonable claims and secured favorable custody arrangements despite false allegations. Edgar hadn't just been planning to leave me, he'd been building a legal team specialized in the exact type of character assassination he intended to pursue. These weren't family law attorneys focused on amicable resolution. They were lawyers who made their reputations destroying wives and mothers in court. But Edgar's thoroughness worked in my favor. His detailed credit card trail provided a timeline of his planning that would prove premeditation. The dates of his legal consultations correlated perfectly with the beginning of his intensified manipulation of Timothy and his acceleration of asset transfers. Researching Yvette Rodriguez revealed information that added new dimensions to Edgar's betrayal. She wasn't just a random secretary he'd seduced. She was a woman with her own financial motivations for participating in the destruction of my marriage. Yvette had significant credit card debt, student loans from a degree she'd never completed, and a history of job hopping that suggested instability. Edgar wasn't just having an affair. He was essentially paying for companionship from someone who depended on him financially. Her apartment lease, car payment, and credit card payments were all recent additions that coincided with her employment at Morrison Development. More disturbing was the discovery that Yvette had researched me extensively on social media. Her browser history, which I accessed through our shared business computer system, showed repeated visits to my LinkedIn profile, my volunteer work pages, and even Timothy's school website. She'd been studying my life, my routines, and my relationships with the thoroughness of someone planning a replacement strategy. Text message metadata revealed that Yvette had been communicating with Edgar about me specifically, conversations that occurred during family events and personal moments. While Edgar was sitting beside me at Timothy's soccer games or family dinners, he was texting intimate details about our private life to his mistress. The most heartbreaking discovery came through Timothy's school records and behavioral reports. I'd requested his files under the pretense of reviewing his academic progress, but what I found was evidence of the psychological damage Edgar's manipulation was causing. Timothy's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had noted concerning changes in his behavior over the past 3 months. Her written observations described a previously confident child who had become anxious and withdrawn. Timothy had started asking questions about divorce, about whether children had to choose between parents, and whether families always stayed together. Timothy seems preoccupied with adult concerns that are unusual for his age group, Mrs. Patterson had written in her monthly report. He's expressed worry about his mother's happiness and has asked if adults sometimes lie to children to protect them. Edgar's coaching wasn't just preparing Timothy to testify against me. It was systematically destroying our son's sense of security and trust. Timothy was developing anxiety symptoms because his father was deliberately creating uncertainty about his family's stability. The school counselor's notes were even more damaging. Timothy had been sent to counseling twice in the past month for episodes where he'd become upset during activities involving family discussions. When asked to draw pictures of his family, Timothy's recent artwork showed stick figures of himself and Edgar, with my figure notably absent or positioned far away from theirs. My deeper investigation into Edgar's financial manipulation revealed a scheme more sophisticated than I'd initially realized. The shell companies weren't just hiding current assets. They were being used to create artificial debt that would reduce the apparent value of Morrison development during divorce proceedings. Edgar had been generating fake invoices between his legitimate business and the shell companies, creating paper trails that suggested Morrison Development owed substantial money to these entities. When our assets were evaluated for divorce, the business would appear heavily leveraged and therefore less valuable, allowing Edgar to retain control while minimizing my settlement. He'd also been manipulating our rental property income by redirecting rent payments to accounts I couldn't access. Our tenants were paying their rent on time, but the money was flowing into Edgar's hidden accounts rather than our joint property management account. This made our rental properties appear less profitable than they actually were, again reducing their apparent value for divorce proceedings. Most cunningly, Edgar had been creating a false paper trail of business expenses that painted me as financially irresponsible. Charges for expensive dinners, entertainment, and travel were being categorized as my personal expenses rather than his business costs or affair-related spending. By Thursday evening, I had documented evidence of financial fraud, adultery, and child manipulation that would destroy Edgar's case and potentially result in criminal charges. But I also realized Edgar's timeline was even more aggressive than I'd thought. Hidden in his study, I'd found printed divorce papers that were already completed except for his signature. The filing date was listed as Monday morning, in 4 days. Edgar wasn't just planning to file next week. He was planning to file first thing Monday morning, giving me no warning and no time to prepare a defense. The papers contained allegations that made my blood run cold. I was accused of emotional abandonment of Timothy, financial irresponsibility threatening the family's security, and adultery with multiple partners, including but not limited to Gordon Hayes. Edgar had crafted a narrative so detailed and damaging that even I almost questioned my own memory while reading it. But Edgar had made one critical error in his rush to file quickly. The divorce papers contained specific dates and details about my alleged behavior. Dates when I could prove I was elsewhere. Details that contradicted documented reality. His lies were so elaborate that they'd created contradictions I could exploit. I had 4 days to build a countercase so comprehensive that Edgar's entire scheme would collapse the moment he walked into that courthouse. 4 days to protect Timothy, secure our assets, and ensure that Edgar's manipulation tactics would be used against him in court. The real battle was about to begin. Friday morning brought a revelation that transformed my understanding of Edgar's character entirely. While searching through old business files to document the timeline of asset transfers, I discovered correspondence that revealed Edgar's divorce wasn't his first venture into systematic deception and financial manipulation. Buried in a folder, marked insurance claims, I found documents related to a property damage claim from 2018 that I'd never known about. According to the paperwork, one of our rental properties had suffered significant water damage, and Edgar had filed a claim for $47,000 in repairs and lost rental income. The insurance company had paid the claim in full, but I'd personally managed our rental properties for years, handling maintenance issues, tenant communications, and financial records. There had never been any water damage to any of our properties. The photos Edgar had submitted showed damage to a property I didn't recognize, and the repair invoices were from contractors I'd never heard of despite handling all our vendor relationships. Edgar had committed insurance fraud, creating false claims and fake documentation to steal nearly $50,000. This wasn't a man who'd recently started lying for financial gain. This was someone with the established pattern of defrauding anyone who trusted him, including insurance companies, business partners, and his own wife. Digging deeper into Edgar's past business dealings revealed a pattern of behavior that extended back years before our marriage. Through public record searches, I found evidence of 3 previous business partnerships that had ended in litigation, with Edgar's former partners accusing him of financial impropriety and breach of fiduciary duty. The most disturbing case involved Edgar's partnership with a man named Fred Coleman in 2015. According to court documents, Coleman had accused Edgar of systematically stealing from their joint construction business by creating fake subcontractor invoices and redirecting client payments to personal accounts. The case had been settled out of court, with Edgar paying Coleman $85,000 in damages, money that had come from our joint accounts, which Edgar had explained as a business investment loss. Coleman's attorney had filed a motion describing Edgar's behavior as sophisticated financial manipulation designed to systematically defraud his business partner while maintaining a facade of legitimate business operations. The legal language was different, but the pattern was identical to what Edgar was doing to me, using trust and insider knowledge to steal assets while creating false narratives to justify the theft. Even more chilling was a deposition excerpt where Coleman described Edgar's personality during their partnership. Mr. Morrison was exceptionally skilled at manipulation, capable of lying with complete sincerity while making the victim feel guilty for questioning his version of events. My investigation into Yvette's background revealed that Edgar's choice of her as both secretary and mistress wasn't random attraction. It was strategic recruitment. Yvette had been hired not because of her secretarial skills, which were mediocre according to her employment history, but because of her financial vulnerability and willingness to participate in questionable activities. Before working for Edgar, Yvette had been fired from 2 previous jobs for violating confidentiality agreements and inappropriate relationships with supervisors. Her references were weak, her resume showed gaps in employment, and her financial situation was desperate, enough that Edgar's job offer had been her only option. Edgar had essentially hired someone who was already compromised and financially dependent, then gradually involved her in increasingly serious criminal activities. Phone records showed that Edgar's relationship with Yvette. Edgar had essentially hired someone who was already compromised and financially dependent, then gradually involved her in increasingly serious criminal activities. Phone records showed that Edgar's relationship with Yvette had begun professionally, but quickly evolved into personal territory, with Edgar providing financial assistance for her rent, car payments, and credit card debt. Text message metadata revealed that Edgar had been coaching Yvette on her role in the divorce proceedings. She wasn't just his mistress. She was being prepared as a witness who would testify about my supposed adultery and neglect of Timothy. Edgar had created a scenario where his own affair partner would testify in court about my fictional infidelity. The most shocking discovery came through Edgar's computer files, which I accessed using administrative privileges I still retained from setting up our business systems years earlier. Hidden in encrypted folders were documents that revealed Edgar's plans extended far beyond our divorce. Edgar had been researching relocating to states with favorable divorce laws and limited extradition agreements. He'd investigated international banking options and offshore citizenship programs. This wasn't just about stealing marital assets. Edgar was planning to disappear entirely after destroying my life and taking Timothy. Real estate listings in his browser history showed properties in Costa Rica and Panama, countries with limited extradition treaties with the United States. Edgar had been planning not just to steal our assets and gain custody of Timothy, but to flee the country where he couldn't be held accountable for his crimes. Flight booking sites showed price comparisons for one-way tickets to Central America, with departure dates in late summer, coinciding with the time frame when our divorce would likely be finalized. Edgar intended to take Timothy on what would appear to be a father-son vacation and never return. Edgar's criminal planning extended beyond individual deception to involve a network of professionals who were either complicit or unknowingly facilitating his scheme. The law firm he'd retained specialized in high-conflict divorces involving asset hiding and parental alienation. The financial advisors he'd consulted were known for helping wealthy clients shield assets from divorce proceedings. Most disturbingly, Edgar had been consulting with a child psychologist who specialized in preparing children for difficult custody proceedings. The psychologist's website promoted services for helping children express their true feelings about parental relationships and overcome emotional manipulation from alienating parents. Edgar was planning to have Timothy evaluated by this psychologist, who would then testify that Timothy's preference for living with his father was genuine and that my relationship with Timothy was psychologically damaging. The psychologist would provide professional validation for Edgar's coached lies, making Timothy's false testimony appear to be legitimate therapeutic assessment. The final piece of Edgar's strategy was ensuring my complete financial ruin even beyond the divorce settlement. He'd been setting up scenarios where I would be liable for debts and legal costs that would force me into bankruptcy, making it impossible for me to fight for custody or appeal unfavorable court decisions. Edgar had been creating fake business, debts that would become my responsibility, setting up scenarios where I would be personally liable for Morrison Development's obligations while he retained control of the profitable assets. He'd structured our finances so that I would inherit the liabilities while he walked away with the assets. His plan was so comprehensive that even if I discovered his infidelity and fought the divorce, I would emerge financially destroyed, psychologically, traumatized, and separated from Timothy permanently. Edgar hadn't just been planning to leave me, he'd been systematically engineering my complete destruction as a person, mother, and financial entity. But Edgar's thoroughness in planning my destruction had created an extensive paper trail of his criminal intent. Every document he'd created to steal from me, every lie he'd crafted to manipulate Timothy, every fraud he'd committed to hide assets was evidence that would expose him completely. Edgar thought he was playing a sophisticated, long game. What he didn't realize was that his elaborate criminal conspiracy had created the perfect evidence trail for his own prosecution. Friday evening, as I helped Timothy with his homework while Edgar claimed to be reviewing contracts in his study, my hidden cameras, "The sooner we file, the better," Edgar said, his voice carrying the tension of someone whose carefully laid plans were being pressured. "Stella has been asking more questions about my schedule, and I think she might be getting suspicious about some of the financial transfers." The person on the other end, presumably his attorney, must have expressed concern about rushing, because Edgar's response was sharp. "We can't wait for perfect timing. If she starts investigating before we file, She could discover the offshore accounts or figure out what I've been doing with Timothy. Edgar was planning to file Monday morning not because it was optimal, but because he was afraid I was getting too close to discovering his scheme. His confidence was cracking, and that desperation was making him sloppy, which could work in my favor if I played it correctly. "The boy is ready," Edgar continued, and my blood chilled as I realized he was discussing Timothy like a weapon to be deployed. "He'll testify exactly as we've practiced. The psychologist meets with him Sunday afternoon to document his preferences, and by Monday morning we'll have professional validation that Stella is psychologically damaging him." Edgar's mention of a Sunday psychological evaluation sent me into immediate research mode. I discovered that Dr. Marcus Fleming, the child psychologist Edgar had retained, was scheduled to conduct a family dynamics assessment with Timothy this Sunday, just 2 days away. This evaluation would be used as evidence in Edgar's divorce, filing to support his claim that I was an unfit mother. But Dr. Fleming wasn't conducting an objective evaluation. His website's testimonials revealed a pattern of supporting fathers in custody battles, often diagnosing mothers with various psychological disorders that justified reducing their parental rights. Edgar had essentially hired a professional who would provide whatever diagnosis Edgar needed to support his case. The evaluation was scheduled to take place at Dr. Fleming's office while I was supposedly volunteering at the animal shelter's weekend adoption event. An event Edgar had encouraged me to participate in, claiming Timothy would benefit from seeing me engaged in community service. In reality, Edgar was ensuring I wouldn't be present during Timothy's evaluation, allowing Dr. Fleming to conduct his assessment based solely on Edgar's coached narrative. Timothy had no idea he was walking into a psychological evaluation that would be used to separate him from his mother permanently. Edgar had told our son he was going to talk to a nice doctor about how families work, presenting it as an educational opportunity rather than the weaponized assessment it actually was. Through Edgar's phone conversations and email communications I'd managed to access, I pieced together his Monday morning strategy. Edgar would file divorce papers first thing Monday morning, simultaneously requesting emergency custody based on Timothy's psychological evaluation and my documented adultery and neglect. His attorney had prepared a motion for immediate supervised visitation only, citing Timothy's emotional distress and my dangerous behavior patterns. Edgar planned to have me served with papers while I was at work, ensuring I'd be unprepared and emotionally devastated when confronted with the allegations. In a professional setting, the timing was calculated to maximize my disadvantage. Monday morning filing meant I'd have minimal time to secure legal representation before Tuesday's emergency custody hearing. Edgar's team had already scheduled witnesses, submitted evidence, and prepared testimony while I would be scrambling to understand what was happening. Most cunningly, Edgar had arranged for Yvette to be working late Monday evening, giving him an alibi for not being home when I received the papers. He would return home Tuesday morning to a wife who'd been served with divorce papers and stripped of custody rights, positioning himself as the concerned father, protecting his son from an unstable mother. Edgar's financial endgame was even more ruthless than his custody manipulation. On Monday morning, simultaneously with filing divorce papers, Edgar planned to freeze our joint accounts by claiming I had been making unauthorized transfers that threatened our marital assets. This wasn't just about hiding money. Edgar was planning to leave me without access to funds for legal representation or basic living expenses. By Tuesday morning, I would be facing divorce papers, custody loss, and complete financial isolation all at once. The business accounts would be frozen pending forensic accounting investigation of my alleged financial misconduct. Edgar had created false documentation suggesting I'd been embezzling from Morrison Development, making it appear that my legitimate business involvement was actually theft. Even more devastating, Edgar had prepared to claim that I'd been using business funds to support my supposed affair with Gordon Hayes. Credit card charges for my gym membership, personal training sessions, and even new workout clothes were being reframed as evidence that I was spending marital assets on an adulterous relationship. Edgar's plan extended beyond legal and financial destruction to complete social isolation. He'd been laying groundwork for months to ensure that when his allegations became public, I would lose all community support. Conversations with our friends and neighbors had been subtly poisoned with hints about my changed behavior and concerning priorities. Edgar had planted seeds suggesting I was becoming unstable, selfish, and distant from Timothy. When the divorce allegations became public, these friends would nod knowingly, remembering Edgar's subtle warnings about my psychological deterioration. Edgar had even contacted my supervisor at the animal shelter, expressing concern about my increasing emotional volatility and suggesting I might need professional help. When the divorce papers alleged psychological instability, my volunteer work, which I thought was an asset, would become additional evidence of my supposed mental health decline. The isolation strategy was designed to ensure I'd have no emotional or practical support during the most devastating period of my life. Friends who might have helped with childcare, emotional support, or even financial assistance had been systematically turned against me through Edgar's patient manipulation. Edgar's ultimate strategy was positioning himself as the perfect victim, a devoted father and successful businessman who'd been betrayed by an unstable, adulterous wife who was psychologically damaging their innocent child. Every element of his plan supported this narrative. His affair with Yvette would be reframed as a support relationship, with a caring colleague who'd helped him cope with his wife's betrayal and emotional abuse. His financial manipulation would be characterized as protecting family assets from a spouse who was spiraling out of control. His coaching of Timothy would be described as helping a confused child process his mother's abandonment. Edgar had created a comprehensive alternative reality where he was the hero protecting his son from a dangerous mother, rather than the criminal systematically destroying his family for financial gain. This narrative was so carefully constructed that even people who knew me well might question their perceptions when confronted with Edgar's evidence. But Edgar's perfect crime had one fatal flaw. He'd revealed his entire strategy while I was listening, and I had the technological skills to document every aspect of his criminal conspiracy. His elaborate lies were about to become the evidence for his own destruction. I had less than 72 hours to turn Edgar's weapons against him. Saturday morning, while Edgar took Timothy to what he claimed was a father-son breakfast, but was likely another coaching session, I made my first strategic move to build the alliance network I'd need to survive Edgar's assault. My first call was to Gordon Hayes, my personal trainer, who had no idea he was being used as the centerpiece of Edgar's adultery allegations. "Gordon, this is Stella Morrison," I began, sitting in my car outside a coffee shop 20 minutes from home. "I need to meet with you today about something urgent that affects both of us." Gordon's voice carried immediate concern. "Is everything okay? You sound stressed." "My husband is planning to accuse me of having an affair with you in divorce proceedings. I need your help to document that our relationship has been completely professional." The silence stretched long enough that I worried the call had dropped. Then Gordon's voice returned, tight with anger. "That's insane. We've never been alone together except during training sessions in a public gym. Every interaction we've had has been witnessed by other trainers and gym members. I know that, and you know that, but Edgar has been creating a false narrative for months. I need you to help me document the truth before he files papers on Monday morning." Gordon agreed to meet me immediately at Elite Fitness, where we spent 2 hours gathering evidence that would demolish Edgar's adultery claims. The gym's security cameras had recorded every training session, showing clearly professional interactions with no inappropriate contact. The front desk staff provided written statements about my punctual arrivals and departures, always alone, never staying longer than scheduled sessions. Most importantly, Gordon's training logs documented every session with detailed notes about exercises, progress, and professional observations. His records showed a client-trainer relationship focused entirely on fitness goals, with no personal conversations beyond polite small talk about Timothy's sports activities. My second critical alliance was securing legal representation that could match Edgar's aggressive team. Through my paralegal network, I contacted Janet Richardson, a family law attorney known for successfully defending against false accusations and parental alienation cases. Janet agreed to an emergency Saturday consultation after I explained the timeline pressure. Her office overlooked the harbor, and as I sat across from her mahogany desk outlining Edgar's scheme, I watched her expression shift from professional skepticism to focused intensity. This is one of the most sophisticated parental alienation and financial fraud cases I've encountered, Janet said after reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. The good news is that his overconfidence has created an extensive paper trail. The bad news is that we have less than 48 hours to prepare a comprehensive defense. Janet immediately contacted her investigation team, arranging for forensic accountants to analyze Edgar's financial transfers and child psychologists to evaluate the damage he'd done to Timothy. "We're not just defending against his attacks," she explained. "We're building a case that will result in criminal charges against Edgar and protect Timothy from further manipulation. The legal fees would be substantial, but Janet was confident that Edgar's hidden assets would more than cover the costs once they were recovered through court orders. More importantly, she had experience with cases involving international flight risks and would immediately file motions to prevent Edgar from taking Timothy out of state. My most challenging alliance building involved confronting the social manipulation Edgar had already accomplished. I started with Chloe Martinez, my closest friend, who I suspected had been influenced by Edgar's subtle poisoning campaign. "Chloe, I need to tell you something that's going to sound crazy, but I need you to listen with an open mind," I began when she answered her phone Saturday afternoon. What followed was a careful explanation of Edgar's manipulation tactics, supported by specific examples of lies he'd told and evidence I'd gathered. Chloe's initial disbelief gradually shifted to horrified recognition as she remembered conversations where Edgar had expressed concern about my behavior. "He asked Fred and me to keep an eye on you because he was worried about your emotional state," Chloe admitted with growing anger. "He said you'd been acting strange and he was concerned about Timothy's well-being." But Edgar's manipulation had an unintended consequence. Chloe had been watching me more carefully as a result of his requests, and her observations contradicted his narrative entirely. She'd seen me being a devoted mother, a committed volunteer, and a supportive friend. Edgar's lies didn't match her direct experience. Chloe immediately agreed to provide written testimony about Edgar's manipulation attempts and her observations of my actual behavior. More importantly, she began contacting other friends to warn them about Edgar's lies and gather their own testimonies about his suspicious comments. Building credible witness testimony required reaching beyond personal relationships to professionals who could speak to my character and Edgar's deceptions. I contacted Mrs. Patterson, Timothy's teacher, who agreed to meet with me Saturday evening after I explained the situation. "I've been concerned about Timothy's changing behavior," Mrs. Patterson admitted as we sat in her empty classroom. "He's been asking questions about divorce and family stability that seem unusual for a child whose parents appear happily married." Mrs. Patterson's detailed observations provided crucial evidence of Edgar's psychological manipulation. She'd documented Timothy's anxiety symptoms, his preoccupation with adult concerns, and his confusion about family dynamics. Her professional training allowed her to recognize signs of parental alienation that would carry significant weight in custody proceedings. Similarly, my supervisor at the animal shelter, Dr. Sarah Chen, provided testimony that contradicted Edgar's claims about my emotional instability. Her records showed consistent, reliable volunteer work with no signs of psychological distress or concerning behavior changes. My most crucial technical ally was my former colleague from the paralegal firm, Marcus Webb, who now worked in digital forensics. Marcus agreed to help analyze Edgar's electronic communications and financial transfers, providing expert testimony about the systematic nature of his deceptions. "This isn't just cheating," Marcus explained as he reviewed Edgar's digital footprint. "This is organized criminal activity involving financial fraud, identity theft, and computer crimes. The metadata alone shows premeditation dating back over a year." Marcus's analysis revealed that Edgar had been researching parental alienation techniques, offshore banking, and international custody law for months before beginning his active manipulation campaign. His browser history provided a roadmap of his criminal planning that would be invaluable in court. My final alliance was with Elite Security Solutions, a firm that specialized in protecting victims of domestic violence and stalking. Their Saturday emergency consultation resulted in additional security cameras being installed throughout my home, GPS tracking for my car, and emergency response protocols in case Edgar discovered my counter-investigation. "Men like your husband often escalate to violence when their control is threatened," the security consultant warned. "The fact that he's planning to flee the country with your son suggests he'll take extreme measures to protect his scheme." The security team also provided me with encrypted communication devices and secure cloud storage systems that Edgar couldn't access or monitor. They coordinated with Janet Richardson's legal team to ensure all evidence collection met court standards and would be admissible in proceedings. By Saturday evening, I had transformed from an isolated victim into the center of a professional support network prepared to expose Edgar's crimes and protect Timothy from further psychological damage. Edgar thought he was launching a surprise attack against a defenseless woman. Instead, he was about to face a coordinated defense that would turn his own weapons against him and expose him as the criminal he'd always been. Saturday night, while Edgar believed I was attending an emergency shelter meeting about the upcoming fundraising gala, my newly assembled team gathered in Janet Richardson's law office for what we called Operation Truth Shield. The conference room had been transformed into a command center with whiteboards covering every wall, displaying timelines, evidence categories, and Edgar's planned attack sequence. Janet had invited key members of our response team: Marcus Webb, with his digital forensics equipment, Dr. Patricia Vance, who specialized in parental alienation cases, and Detective Ray Chen from the Financial Crimes Unit, who'd agreed to consult on the criminal aspects of Edgar's scheme. The room hummed with the focused energy of professionals who understood we were preventing a devastating injustice. "Edgar's plan has 3 phases, Janet began, pointing to the timeline on the main whiteboard. Phase 1 is Sunday's psychological evaluation designed to create professional validation for his lies. Phase 2 is Monday morning's legal ambush, with divorce papers and emergency custody motions. Phase 3 is the financial isolation that prevents Stella from mounting an effective defense. Our counter-strategy needed to dismantle each phase while simultaneously building our own offensive case. We're not just defending, Janet emphasized. We're launching our own coordinated attack that will expose Edgar's criminal conspiracy and protect Timothy from further psychological damage. Our most immediate challenge was neutralizing Dr. Fleming's biased psychological evaluation scheduled for Sunday afternoon. Dr. Vance had researched Fleming's history and confirmed our suspicions. He had a pattern of diagnosing mothers with personality disorders while validating fathers' custody claims. Fleming's evaluation will be worthless in court if we can prove bias and coaching, Dr. Vance explained. But more importantly, we need to protect Timothy from further manipulation during that session. Our solution was elegant. I would exercise my parental right to have a second psychologist present during Fleming's evaluation. Dr. Vance would attend as my advocate, recording the session and documenting any leading questions or inappropriate coaching attempts. Fleming couldn't refuse without appearing biased, and Dr. Vance's presence would prevent him from manipulating Timothy's responses. Additionally, Marcus had discovered that Fleming's office used cloud-based recording systems for session documentation. With proper legal warrants that Janet was preparing to file first thing Monday morning, We could access Fleming's recordings of previous sessions with other children, potentially exposing a pattern of bias that would discredit his entire practice. But our most powerful weapon was Timothy himself. Dr. Vance would conduct her own independent evaluation immediately after Fleming's session, documenting the differences between Timothy's natural responses and his coached answers. This would provide direct evidence of Edgar's manipulation techniques. Edgar planned to surprise me with divorce papers Monday morning, but our team was preparing to file our own paperwork that would turn his surprise attack into a courtroom disaster. Janet had been working with an emergency court schedule to ensure our motions would be filed simultaneously with Edgar's, creating a legal collision that would expose his lies immediately. Our emergency filings included a motion for protective custody based on Edgar's psychological abuse of Timothy, a request for forensic accounting of all marital assets due to suspected fraud, and a criminal referral for financial crimes that Detective Chen was preparing. Edgar expected to walk into court as the wronged husband. Instead, he'd face immediate criminal investigation. The timing was crucial. Edgar's attorney had scheduled their emergency custody hearing for Tuesday morning, assuming I'd be unprepared and emotionally devastated. Instead, I'd be represented by a full legal team with evidence of Edgar's crimes, witness testimony contradicting his allegations, and professional evaluations exposing his manipulation of Timothy. Marcus had prepared a comprehensive digital presentation showing Edgar's communication patterns with Yvette, his financial transfers to hidden accounts, and his research into parental alienation techniques. The evidence would be projected in the courtroom, showing Edgar's systematic planning in undeniable detail. Edgar's plan to freeze our joint accounts and leave me financially helpless required immediate countermeasures. Janet had coordinated with a forensic accountant to trace all of Edgar's hidden transfers and identify recoverable assets before Edgar could complete his theft. Monday morning, simultaneous with our court filings, we would request emergency asset preservation orders that would freeze Edgar's hidden accounts and prevent him from accessing the stolen funds. Detective Chen's criminal investigation would provide additional legal authority to seize assets that had been obtained through fraud. Most importantly, I had quietly moved a portion of our legitimate joint savings into a separate account that Edgar didn't know existed, ensuring I could pay legal fees and maintain stability for Timothy regardless of Edgar's financial manipulation. This wasn't theft. It was protecting marital assets from a spouse who was actively stealing them. Our forensic accountant had already prepared detailed analysis showing that Edgar's business expenses were actually payments to Yvette and funding for his affair. When Edgar claimed financial hardship to justify reduced support payments, we'd present evidence showing he'd spent tens of thousands of dollars on his mistress while claiming he couldn't afford proper child support. Edgar had spent months poisoning our social circle against me, but our team was prepared to expose his manipulation campaign to the same community members he'd tried to turn into allies. Chloe had coordinated with other friends to document Edgar's concerned trolling about my behavior, creating a record of his systematic attempts to isolate me socially. Dr. Chen from the animal shelter was preparing a public statement about Edgar's inappropriate attempts to undermine my volunteer work, describing his behavior as consistent with abusive partners who try to destroy their victims' support networks. Her professional observations would carry significant weight in our community. The local newspaper had been alerted by Janet's media contacts about the upcoming case involving parental alienation and financial fraud. While we wouldn't comment on ongoing legal proceedings, Edgar's public reputation as a community leader would be scrutinized once his criminal behavior became public record. Our highest priority was protecting Timothy from further psychological damage, while Edgar's manipulation campaign collapsed around him. Dr. Vance had prepared age-appropriate explanations for the upcoming legal proceedings that would help Timothy understand what was happening without traumatizing him further. A family court advocate specializing in child welfare had been assigned to represent Timothy's interests independently of both parents. This advocate would ensure that Timothy's voice was heard in custody proceedings without being influenced by either Edgar's coaching or my own emotional investment in the outcome. Most importantly, we'd arranged for Timothy to stay with Chloe and Fred Martinez during the initial court proceedings, removing him from the household tension while ensuring he remained with trusted family friends. This would prevent Edgar from using Timothy as an emotional weapon during the legal battle. Our comprehensive strategy transformed Edgar's planned destruction of our family into an opportunity to expose his criminal behavior and protect Timothy from future manipulation. Edgar thought he was orchestrating my downfall, but he'd actually created the evidence trail for his own prosecution. In less than 36 hours, Edgar Morrison would discover that underestimating his wife had been the greatest mistake of his criminal career. Sunday morning arrived with Edgar in an unusually good mood, humming while he made coffee and asking cheerfully about my plans for the day. He had no idea that in 12 hours, his entire criminal conspiracy would begin collapsing around him. "I'm taking Timothy to see Dr. Fleming this afternoon," Edgar announced casually, as if discussing a routine pediatric appointment. "Just a quick chat about how he's handling school stress and some questions about family dynamics." I nodded with practiced innocence, stirring my coffee while internally preparing for the intervention that would expose Edgar's manipulation in real time. "That sounds helpful. Timothy has seemed a little anxious lately." Edgar's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. In his mind, my agreement validated his narrative that I was either oblivious to Timothy's problems or complicit in causing them. What he didn't know was that Dr. Vance would be waiting at Dr. Fleming's office with legal authorization to observe the session and document every leading question, every coached response, every moment of psychological manipulation, while Edgar took Timothy to what he thought would be the final nail in my coffin. My hidden cameras captured his preparation ritual. The footage showed Edgar coaching Timothy one last time, reviewing the stories they'd practiced about Mommy's behavior, her relationship with Gordon, and her emotional distance from the family. "Remember, buddy, when the doctor asks about Mommy's moods, what do you say?" "That she gets angry a lot and doesn't want to spend time with us anymore," Timothy recited with the mechanical precision of a well-rehearsed performance. "And when he asks about her friend Gordon?" "That she talks to him on the phone and smiles more with him than with you." Edgar's manipulation was so thorough that Timothy genuinely believed these false memories were real experiences. The footage captured not just coaching sessions, but systematic psychological abuse that would result in criminal charges once presented to authorities. At 2 p.m., Edgar walked into Dr. Fleming's office expecting a compliant evaluation that would rubber stamp his custody narrative. Instead, he found Dr. Vance waiting with legal documentation requiring her presence as an independent child advocate. "Mr. Morrison," Dr. Fleming said with visible discomfort, "there's been a development. Mrs. Morrison has exercised her parental right to have an independent psychologist present during today's evaluation." Edgar's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of panic that Dr. Vance documented in her notes. "I wasn't aware that was necessary," Edgar replied, his voice carefully controlled. "This is just a routine consultation." "Of course," Dr. Vance said smoothly. "I'm here simply to ensure Timothy's best interests are protected. Please proceed with your normal evaluation process." What followed was 2 hours of documented bias that would destroy both Dr. Fleming's credibility and Edgar's custody case. Every leading question was recorded, every coached response was noted, and every attempt to manipulate Timothy's answers was professionally documented by an expert witness. While Edgar thought he was securing his victory, Marcus Webb was in Janet, Richardson's office, compiling the digital evidence that would expose Edgar's entire criminal enterprise. Bank records, communication logs, financial transfers, and metadata created an undeniable timeline of systematic fraud and manipulation. The presentation was devastating. Edgar's affair documented through thousands of communications with Yvette, his financial theft proven through forensic accounting, his manipulation of Timothy captured on professional-grade surveillance equipment. Every lie he'd told, every dollar he'd stolen, every false memory he'd implanted in Timothy's mind was documented with courtroom-quality evidence. Detective Chen had completed his preliminary investigation and was prepared to file criminal charges Monday morning. Edgar wouldn't just lose the divorce case. He'd face prosecution for financial fraud, identity theft, child abuse, and conspiracy charges that could result in years in prison. Sunday evening, as Edgar celebrated what he believed was his final victory, I tucked Timothy into bed knowing it would be the last night my son would spend believing lies about his mother. Tomorrow, the truth would set us both free from Edgar's manipulation. "Mommy," Timothy said as I kissed him goodnight. "Are you happy?" The question broke my heart because I knew Edgar had coached him to ask it, preparing evidence that I was emotionally distant from my own child. "I'm very happy that you're my son," I answered honestly. "No matter what happens, that will never change." Edgar stood in the doorway watching this interaction, probably calculating how he could twist my words in court. He had no idea that by tomorrow evening, he'd be the one answering questions, from police detectives investigating his crimes. The trap was set. The evidence was compiled. The team was ready. Edgar Morrison's perfect crime was about to become his perfect downfall. Edgar left the house Monday morning at 8:15 a.m., briefcase in hand, wearing his best suit and the confident smile of a man about to execute the perfect crime. He kissed my cheek and told Timothy to be good for Mommy, with the casual cruelty of someone who believed this would be among the last normal interactions our son would have with me. "I'll probably be late tonight," Edgar said, his voice carrying false regret. "Big day at the office, and then I have to handle some legal paperwork." He had no idea that Janet Richardson's team had been at the courthouse since 7 a.m., filing emergency motions that would turn his surprise attack into his own legal execution. By the time Edgar arrived at his attorney's office, Detective Chen was already reviewing criminal charges, and Dr. Vance was preparing her report on Sunday's psychological evaluation that exposed Dr. Fleming's bias and Edgar's coaching. At 9:47 a.m., while Edgar was probably reviewing his divorce papers one final time, his attorney received an emergency call from the court clerk. Counter motions had been filed by my legal team, criminal investigations had been initiated, and Edgar's planned 10:02 a.m. filing was about to become a courtroom ambush. I arrived at the courthouse at 10:15 a.m., flanked by Janet Richardson and Marcus Webb, carrying 3 bankers' boxes of evidence that documented every aspect of Edgar's criminal conspiracy. Edgar was waiting in the hallway outside the family court clerk's office, his face pale as his attorney whispered urgent explanations about the unexpected developments. When Edgar saw me approaching with my legal team, his confident mask finally shattered completely. The man who had spent months planning my destruction looked like he was seeing a ghost. The ghost of the wife he thought he'd already defeated. "Stella," he started, his voice carrying a tremor I'd never heard before. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but—" "I know exactly what I'm doing, Edgar," I interrupted, my voice steady and professional. "I'm protecting our son from a father who's been psychologically abusing him for months. I'm recovering the marital assets you've been stealing. And I'm ensuring that you face criminal prosecution for fraud, identity theft, and child abuse." Edgar's attorney stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "Mrs. Morrison, I think there's been some misunderstanding. We're simply here to file routine divorce paperwork based on documented concerns about—" Janet Richardson cut him off with a smile that could have frozen fire. "Documented concerns? Yes, we have plenty of those. Mr. Davidson, I believe you'll want to review these criminal referrals before proceeding with any family court matters." The courthouse conference room became a theater for Edgar's destruction as Marcus Webb set up the digital presentation that would expose every lie Edgar had told. The first video showed Edgar and Yvette in our marital bed discussing their plan. To frame me for adultery while coaching Timothy to lie about my behavior. Edgar's face went white as his own voice filled the room. The kid believes every word I tell him. By the time we get to court, he'll testify that Mommy has been leaving him alone, neglecting him, and carrying on with her personal trainer. His attorney looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Edgar's carefully constructed false narrative was collapsing in real time, replaced by undeniable video evidence of his systematic manipulation and abuse. "There's more," Marcus said quietly, advancing to financial records that showed Edgar's theft of marital assets. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, shell companies. Mr. Morrison has been systematically stealing from his own family while planning to flee the country with the child. Detective Chen entered the conference room with documents that transformed the meeting from a family law dispute into a criminal proceeding. "Mr. Morrison, you're under arrest for financial fraud, identity theft, child endangerment, and conspiracy charges. You have the right to remain silent." Edgar's arrest was swift and professional, but as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he looked at me with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "You planned this," he said, his voice filled with the rage of someone whose perfect scheme had been perfectly countered. "No, Edgar," I replied calmly. "You planned this. I just documented it." Within 2 hours, Edgar's entire criminal enterprise had collapsed. His divorce papers were withdrawn by his attorney, who was now focused on negotiating Edgar's criminal defense rather than pursuing custody claims. Dr. Fleming's psychological practice was under investigation for bias and unethical conduct. Yvette had been terminated from Morrison Development and was facing her own criminal charges as a co-conspirator. Most importantly, Timothy was safe. The family court advocate had immediately suspended Edgar's custody rights pending criminal proceedings, and Dr. Vance was beginning therapeutic sessions to help Timothy understand that the stories his father had taught him were lies designed to hurt his mother. Edgar's perfect crime had become perfect evidence for his own prosecution. His systematic planning, his detailed documentation, his comprehensive manipulation, all of it had created an ironclad case against him. As I walked out of the courthouse that afternoon, I realized that Edgar had taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Truth isn't just more powerful than lies. It's undefeatable when properly documented and strategically presented. Within hours of Edgar's arrest, emergency court orders froze all of his hidden accounts and began the process of recovering stolen marital assets. The forensic accountants Janet had hired worked with federal investigators to trace every fraudulent transfer, every shell company, every offshore account Edgar had used to hide our money. The scope of his theft was staggering: $347,000 in direct transfers to accounts I'd never known existed, another $89,000 in fabricated business expenses that had actually funded his affair with Yvette, and $156,000 in rental property income diverted to his personal use. Edgar had stolen over $500,000 from our marriage while planning to leave me financially devastated. But Edgar's meticulous record-keeping, which he'd thought would protect him from discovery, became the evidence for complete asset recovery. Every transfer was documented, every fake invoice was cataloged, every hidden account was traced back to our legitimate marital funds. The court ordered immediate restitution plus penalties that would ensure Edgar emerged from this disaster financially ruined, while I recovered everything he'd stolen, and more. Detective Chen's investigation also revealed that Edgar's insurance fraud from 2018 had never been properly investigated. The insurance company was now pursuing recovery of the $47,000 fraudulent claim, adding additional financial pressure to Edgar's mounting legal costs. Edgar's bail hearing became a showcase for the evidence against him. The prosecution presented video footage of his affair, audio recordings of his coaching sessions with Timothy, and financial documents proving systematic fraud over multiple years. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern as the presentation continued. "Mr. Morrison," the judge said during sentencing remarks, You have engaged in a pattern of criminal behavior that targeted the most vulnerable members of your own family. You manipulated your child's psychology, stole from your wife's trust, and attempted to destroy an innocent woman's life for personal financial gain. Edgar's bail was set at $500,000, far more than his available liquid assets after the asset freezes. His attorney's attempts to argue for reduced bail were dismissed when prosecutors presented evidence of Edgar's researched flight plans to Costa Rica and his history of using false identities in business dealings. Yvette's separate hearing revealed her role as more than just a mistress. She had actively participated in creating false documents, helped Edgar manipulate business records, and had been promised a percentage of stolen assets once Edgar successfully fled the country. Her cooperation with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges provided additional evidence against Edgar. Edgar's arrest became front-page news in our local newspaper, exposing his manipulation campaign to the entire community he'd tried to turn against me. Friends who had been influenced by his subtle poisoning came forward with apologies and their own stories of his manipulative behavior. Chloe Martinez organized a support gathering that became an impromptu celebration of justice. We all thought Edgar was the perfect husband and father, she told the group. Now we realize he was just a perfect liar who was manipulating all of us. The animal shelter where I volunteered issued a public statement supporting me and condemning Edgar's attempts to undermine my character through false allegations. Dr. Sarah Chen's professional observations about Edgar's manipulative behavior were quoted in the article, providing expert validation of his abusive tactics. Dr. Fleming's psychological practice collapsed within a week of the court proceedings. Dr. Vance's documentation of his biased evaluation techniques triggered investigations by state licensing boards and professional ethics committees. Other families who had been subjected to Fleming's manipulated evaluations came forward with similar stories of coaching and bias. Fleming lost his license and faced potential criminal charges for participating in child abuse through psychological manipulation. His practice closure sent a message to other professionals who might be tempted to participate in parental alienation schemes for financial gain. Edgar's attorney, Davidson, faced his own professional sanctions for accepting a case based on fabricated evidence without proper verification. The state bar investigated his firm's practices and found a pattern of representing clients in questionable custody cases involving false allegations. The most important justice was Timothy's liberation from Edgar's psychological manipulation. Dr. Vance's therapeutic sessions helped Timothy understand that his father had taught him false stories about his mother, and that none of the memories Edgar had created were real experiences. "Daddy told me things that weren't true?" Timothy asked during one of our first honest conversations after Edgar's arrest. "Yes, sweetheart." Daddy was confused and scared, and he made some very bad choices that hurt our family. Timothy's recovery was gradual but remarkable. His anxiety symptoms decreased as he realized his family wasn't actually unstable. His father had been creating artificial stress through manipulation. His teacher reported that Timothy was returning to his previous confident, happy personality, as the false narratives Edgar had implanted were replaced with truth and stability. The family court advocate assigned to represent Timothy's interests recommended supervised visitation only for Edgar, contingent on his completion of psychological counseling and parental alienation education programs. Timothy would be protected from further manipulation while still maintaining a relationship with his father, if Edgar chose to do the work necessary to repair the damage he'd caused. Justice had been served not through revenge, but through truth, systematically documented and professionally presented. Edgar's elaborate lies had been replaced with undeniable facts, and our family's healing could finally begin. Our house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if Edgar's lies had been a physical weight pressing down on every room. Timothy's laughter echoed through the hallways again, genuine and carefree in a way I hadn't heard since Edgar began his manipulation campaign. The business, now renamed Morrison Hayes Development after I brought Gordon on as a partner, was thriving. under new leadership focused on honest dealings and transparent practices. Gordon's integrity and construction expertise complemented my financial management skills perfectly, creating a partnership built on mutual respect rather than deception. "You know what's funny?" Timothy said one evening as we worked on his science project together. "I used to think families were supposed to be worried all the time. Now I know that was just Daddy being confused." Dr. Vance's therapy sessions had helped Timothy reframe Edgar's manipulation as his father's illness rather than something inherent to family life. Timothy understood that Edgar's behavior wasn't normal or acceptable, but he wasn't carrying guilt about his father's choices. Edgar's criminal trial had resulted in a plea bargain, 4 years in federal prison for financial fraud, followed by 3 years of supervised probation during which he was prohibited from making financial decisions for any business entity. His admission of guilt in the criminal proceedings had simplified the divorce settlement enormously. The civil court awarded me full custody of Timothy, with Edgar eligible for supervised visitation only after completing court-mandated therapy for parental alienation and anger management. Edgar had attended exactly 2 therapy sessions before deciding that admitting fault was too damaging to his appeal prospects. Yvette had received 18 months in minimum security prison and was required to pay restitution for her role in the financial fraud. Her cooperation with prosecutors had been essential in recovering the offshore accounts, and her testimony had eliminated any possibility of Edgar claiming innocence. The insurance company's recovery of the fraudulent 2018 claim had added additional financial penalties that left Edgar facing bankruptcy upon his release from prison. His reputation in the construction industry was permanently destroyed, ensuring he couldn't easily restart his pattern of financial manipulation. The most remarkable transformation was Timothy's relationship with honesty. Having experienced firsthand how lies could poison a family, Timothy had developed an almost philosophical appreciation for truth-telling. "Mama," he said one afternoon, "if someone asks me to keep a secret from you, I should tell you instead, right?" "Absolutely. Healthy families don't have secrets between parents and children." Timothy nodded seriously. "Daddy used to say our talks were just between us men, but that made me feel scared instead of special." Dr. Vance had explained that Timothy's experience with Edgar's manipulation had actually strengthened his ability to recognize unhealthy relationship dynamics. Rather than making him distrustful of all adults, the experience had taught him the difference between healthy privacy and harmful secrecy. Our community had also learned valuable lessons about the sophistication of manipulation tactics and the importance of supporting rather than judging families in crisis. The school district implemented new training for teachers and counselors to recognize signs of parental alienation, and the local family court system adopted stricter guidelines for psychological evaluations in custody cases. My friendship with Chloe had deepened through our shared recognition of how easily even close friends can be manipulated by skilled liars. "Edgar fooled all of us," she reflected, "but you didn't let him win. And that gives the rest of us courage to trust our instincts when something feels wrong." The animal shelter where I volunteered had created a support group for women experiencing domestic manipulation, providing resources and education about emotional abuse tactics that often precede physical violence. My experience had become a teaching tool for helping other women recognize and document manipulation before it escalated to Edgar's level of systematic destruction. Looking back, I realized that Edgar's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating my intelligence or investigative skills. It was assuming that truth was weaker than lies. He'd spent months constructing elaborate false narratives, never realizing that reality has a weight and consistency that fiction can never match. Truth didn't just set us free, it made us stronger, smarter, and more connected as a family and community. Edgar's lies had been designed to isolate and destroy, but confronting them with documented facts had created bonds of trust and support that would protect us forever. Standing in our renovated kitchen, watching Timothy help Gordon install new cabinet hardware with the patient focus of a child who trusts the adults in his life, I reflected on the profound transformation Edgar's betrayal had ultimately created. "Mom," Timothy said, looking up from the screwdriver he was carefully turning, "remember when I used to be scared that families always had problems? Now I know that was just because Daddy was making problems on purpose." Gordon smiled at Timothy's wisdom. "Smart kid. Sometimes the strongest families are the ones that had to overcome the biggest challenges." The business we'd built from Edgar's ashes was more successful than Morrison Development had ever been, precisely because it was founded on genuine partnership rather than manipulation. Our clients trusted us because our word meant something. Our employees thrived because we created stability rather than chaos. Timothy's relationship with truth had become his superpower. At 11, he could spot manipulation tactics that fooled many adults. "That person is trying to make me feel guilty for something that isn't my fault," he'd observed about a manipulative teacher. Dr. Vance said his early experience with systematic lying had created an almost supernatural ability to recognize deception. Edgar's story had become a cautionary tale that protected other families. 3 women in our community had recognized similar manipulation patterns in their own marriages and sought help before the abuse escalated to Edgar's level of systematic destruction. The legal precedent our case set had strengthened laws protecting children from parental alienation, making it easier for courts to recognize and prevent psychological manipulation. Dr. Vance now consulted on cases nationwide, using our documented evidence as a template for identifying sophisticated manipulation tactics. Janet Richardson's law firm had developed a specialization in defending against false allegations, using the investigative techniques we'd pioneered to protect other innocent parents from Edgar-style destruction campaigns. But the most profound change was in myself. Edgar's betrayal had taught me that trust wasn't about blind faith. It was about verification, documentation, and the courage to believe evidence over comfortable lies. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Timothy said as we finished our evening homework routine. "You didn't let Daddy's lies become true just because he said them a lot." That night, as I tucked Timothy into bed in our house that was finally filled with genuine peace, I realized Edgar had given me an unexpected gift. His elaborate deceptions had forced me to develop skills, strength, and wisdom I never would have discovered otherwise. The woman who had once trusted completely and questioned nothing had become someone who could protect herself and her child from any threat. Edgar's attempt to destroy me had instead created the strongest, smartest, most resilient version of myself. Truth hadn't just defeated lies. It had transformed us both into people who could recognize, document, and defeat deception in all its forms. We weren't just survivors. We were warriors for honesty in a world that sometimes rewards manipulation. And that was the greatest victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.